Good evening, and welcome to the Clarksville-Montgomery County Superintendent interview. Today is May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, and this evening we'll be interviewing Dr. Jean Luna-Vedder, our third or fourth candidates that we have applying for the position. Dr. Vedder is no stranger to the Clarksville-Montgomery County area. She currently works within the school system. I want to thank you for applying for the position. And the way we're going to conduct this evening is we're going to ask a series of questions. I think you've been privy to them. And we'll go from different board members. We're scheduled for 1.5 hours this evening. Afterwards, we'll take a recess, and then we'll open up for the employees section. Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Very good. First question. We're glad that you're interested in our director of school position. What specifically attracts you to Clarksville and the Clarksville-Montgomery County school system?
For me, the decision to apply for this position was quite honestly just as much a matter of the heart as it was a logical decision. So as you referenced, I was with the Clarksville-Montgomery County school system from 2007 until 2019 when I did go to the Tennessee Department of Education. I am very invested in this school system. So we arrived in Tennessee in 2007 as a military family. My children have all enrolled in the public school system. I had 3 sons who graduated, 2010, 2015, and 2018. I have a son who's currently playing baseball here at Austin P and attending college, graduates, he tells me, 9 a.m. tomorrow. So we're hoping that to be true. I have a daughter who's a senior, and I have a stepdaughter who is in a special needs classroom here at the elementary. So Clarksville-Montgomery County school system was very different when we arrived here, and there are so many pathways for educators that it was just very special to me. I went from being a teacher to an assistant principal to a principal to a high school director. And the opportunities within the system are amazing. And I truly believe that this school system should be one of the leading academic counties in the entire state, of the 147 districts in this state. So when I learned about this position, I'll be honest, I struggled. I love the job I'm doing currently, but I just could not help but be drawn back to this system. So I'm extremely honored, excited, and humbled to be one of the candidates, and I appreciate this evening.
Thank you.
Dr. Luna-Vedder, what do you consider to be the major strength that you would bring to this position?
So I think one of the strengths that I have is the fact that I have been in multiple states in multiple positions prior to coming here. So I was in Iowa, I was in Washington, I was in North Carolina, but I've been in Tennessee since 2007, and this is where I intend to stay. I have had the opportunity to have many years, since 1996, I've been an educator, and I've had about equal years at the elementary, at the middle, and at the high school. And so I think that's a unique feature. I would also say that one of the things that makes me unique is that state experience I mentioned. So when the opportunity came up in 2019, it came from the Commissioner of Education to join her team. I was able to get a lens that I had never seen before. So in the last 3 years, I've been able to see the connections that go on in a district. So at the state level, one of the reasons I even went is because I had a lot of opinions about what should be done at the state level. And when I was sharing those with the commissioner, she quite frankly said, well, then come and make that happen. And so at the state level, I've been able to see how the laws are made, how those conversations are had, how they honestly do listen to what is going on in districts and listen to the voices and how to make change. and then how to bring that back to the district. So I would say that's been a unique lens. It's also been a unique opportunity to partner with other state agencies, the Department of Labor. I've partnered with them extensively to actually expand some of the work that has gone on here at Montgomery County related to the Grow Your Own, to take that as a teaching apprenticeship and actually work hand in hand with the Tennessee Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Labor to get that teaching apprenticeship actually registered nationally, to be the first in the state, in the nation, to have that happen. So I think that lens has been unique. I would also say, as a military dependent for over 20 years, I understand the needs of the military community. I understand what it's like to take children and have to move them to another state, to another district. Not only academically what that means. When we arrived here in 2007, I had a son who was a 10th grader, and he had to take physical science with all the freshmen because in North Carolina it wasn't necessary. It was nothing major, but still it's something where it was like, I have to go with the 9th graders. Son, you will be just fine. But those are some realities, not just academically, but socially, emotionally. What is that like to have a parent who's deployed? What is that like for families? Unless you've been in a military situation and had those situations, you can empathize, but you don't truly know. So I would say that does give me a unique lens. I am embedded here in the Clarksville community, as I mentioned, since 2007. Whether it be the junior pro football or the Little League fields or the competition dance, just the arts. I love this community, and so you will see me on the weekends. You will see me out and about in this community, and whether or not I get this job, that will continue to be the case. And I would also say that I have a history of outcomes. So whether that was as a high school principal, a high school director, or even in my current position at the state the past 3 years, we have led some major initiatives in the last 3 years that have had a huge impact on districts. So those are just a few of the things that I think set me.
Thank you.
Dr. Luna-Vedder, do you prefer us to address you as Dr. Luna or Dr. Vedder?
Dr. Luna or Dr. Either one's just fine, I promise. Or Jean, I promise.
That's what I would be comfortable.
You just go right ahead.
How does your philosophy of education align with our district?
So I would say first of all, I think I lived this strategic plan for many years, and so when we look at the major priorities, I wholeheartedly agree. Obviously, we've got the academic achievement. We've got looking at how do we keep our educators, that employee capacity, the efficiencies, the effectiveness, and also engaging the public. My major philosophy is just the fact that I think education is the one defining factor that sets everyone apart, and I cannot preach that enough to my children all the time. My mom was a high school dropout. My dad was a high school graduate who worked at Caterpillar Tractor Company, and I was the youngest of 3 girls in a farming community in Iowa, and I was the first to go to college. And nieces, nephews tell them all the time, education is the key to making a difference in your life. And so it is a passion for me to make sure that every student who graduates has a plan. I don't care if that plan is the military, if it is going to a 4-year, a 2-year, if it is going into the workforce, as long as it's a high-wage, in-demand career that has pathways for the future. And I think in this community, we have been very good, but we need to get even better about that K-12 alignment. What does it look like when elementary works with middle, works with high school, works with post-secondary, to make sure that we are exhibiting that teamwork and that collaborative goals with benchmarks. I think that it is going to be very important when we look to the future that we make sure we've got kids engaged in the work-based learning and the apprenticeships. We have a very unique opportunity coming up here that Governor Lee just signed, where $500 million is coming to districts. And This district alone stands to gain $1 million for every high school, $500,000 for every middle school. So there are so many opportunities, and I just want to make sure that we're ready for all of that. But the other thing I really want to emphasize is that teamwork. So I think we've seen in this community in past endeavors the power that can happen when there is a community goal and everyone knows it and everyone knows their part and their piece. And so again, I love the sports, and so I liken it to the analogies of we can have pockets of success where schools are doing level 5 or, you know, across the, where we've got some great things going on. But in baseball, if my son scores a home run, that's great, but unless the team wins, it really doesn't mean anything that game. And so I would say the same thing needs to be happening here in our schools. We need to be lifting up each other. So if we have level 5 schools, that's great. What are you doing to help your level 1 brother or sister make sure that their school is rising as well? Because every one of our kids deserves the best. I believe in healthy competition, but not when it stamps down anyone else.
Thank you.
I didn't want to ask my question. Your address is on your resume. And you already told us where you live, your children are school here, but if selected director of schools, would you make Montgomery County your place of residency if it's not already?
You're stuck with me whether you hire me or not. Yes.
Dr. Luna, welcome back to Clarksville-Montgomery County. Give us an example of when you changed your mind and taken a different course of action as a result of listening to others, either professionally or personally.
Absolutely. So the first one that came to mind was actually when I thought back to the early technical college at TCAT. So when we were first starting that endeavor, and I was here as a high school director, and we were really thinking about, we knew we wanted to rethink what high school looked like and create another opportunity there at the TCAT, but we weren't quite sure what that should look like. And so we created what we thought was our plan. And then we started telling people about it. I took it to the high school student advisory group, took it to some school counselors, talked to some high school teachers, and at the time we had said, must have a 2.5 GPA, and we had a whole list of things. And they said, what about those students that we would consider C students? That's a 2.0. And I was like, We went back and forth, quite honestly. We ended up changing that to a 2.2. So we wanted to make sure that the students could be successful at the TCAT, that they were strong enough academically to sustain what that looked like, to do the online school as well as have their courses at TCAT. So that's one example. The other one that comes to mind is in my current role. So I'm old school, and I believe that typically it is best to have in-person learning. So a teacher in front of kids, and I probably believed that way more prior to the pandemic, to be quite honest. I wasn't sure how that could work as far as the virtual school. I was on school visits because I absolutely love school visits. It's the best part of any of our jobs. And so I was on school visits with the commissioner, and we went into a classroom, and there was a teacher. And she had 25 kids in front of her, and they were all on their laptop, and I'm like, what class is this? And she said, this is my planning period. And I was like, doesn't look like your planning period. And she said, well, at the school, we don't have AP teachers. We don't have enough capacity to have advanced placement classes. So they're actually taking some dual enrollment opportunities. And so the commissioner and I got talking when we got back to the office. And we really thought about how do we make sure that our rural schools, that our sparse schools, that our small schools that can barely have enough teachers to fulfill graduation requirements could have that opportunity. And that's where we came up with AP Access for All. So AP Access for All is actually, it's an online program, but it is taught by teachers from the state of Tennessee. It was a $10 million initiative that now encompasses 17 courses, and 88% of our districts across the state participate. So essentially, even thinking back when I was principal at Clarksville High School, I would have to every other year, 1 year have AP Biology, 1 year have AP Chemistry, because I couldn't have a teacher teaching both. You can do that now. So essentially we can offer that. So all of these 17 courses are available to students online to be able to take that course and earn that post-secondary credit. So those are just a couple examples.
Again, welcome. In your administration, what avenues are open for you to listen to the concerns of employees, students, parents, and the community? How would you plan to have time available to all involved?
Well, if you haven't guessed already, I like to talk. And so when I'm out in the community, I love to be engaged. And so when I was an administrator, whether that was at the high school level or at the district level, I was always open for a conversation. I believe when you are in a public job, that's part of your duty. It is to have those conversations when you're out and about to talk about what's going on in the building, to talk about what's going on in the district, and quite honestly, just to listen. A lot of times when people are upset, there may not even be a solution, but they want to be heard. They want to know that you recognize that there is a problem. So I would say accessibility. If it's somewhere that it doesn't make sense to have a lengthy conversation or it needs to be a private conversation, then you say, I absolutely would love to give this the time that it needs. So let's plan a time to get together next week. Let's plan a time for a call. As an administrator, I always had an open door policy. So every one of my teachers, classified staff, always knew if I was in my office, the door was open unless I had to be involved in a private conversation. And they knew that meant they were always welcome to come in, whether they just dropped in on their planning period, if it was, hey, I've got this concern, if it was whatever it was. I think it's very important. I believe in relationships are really the key to everything. And so if there's going to be a problem, if you already have that relationship developed, a lot of times that solves the issue. I also think you need to have proactive opportunities. So obviously those regularly scheduled faculty meetings, those engagement groups, those advisory groups. People need to know that there is a time carved out for them. When I was an administrator, I actually started classified meetings as well because it didn't make sense to me. We were having faculty meetings, but how do classified employees have a chance to know what's going on, to communicate their concerns, to ask questions? And it was extremely beneficial to actually know another perspective. So teachers could give you one perspective, but Miss Long at the front desk and the lead custodian and the bookkeepers all had other perspectives that were extremely valuable. And so, that was always, I felt it to be very helpful. I also have the philosophy that if you actually sit and listen and address concerns immediately, whether it's parents showing up, whether it's community members with concerns, a lot of times that's going to alleviate bigger problems. I found that typically bigger problems arise when they've been allowed to fester for too long. When people feel they haven't been heard, when people feel that they are talking and they're being ignored. And I'm very transparent in responding. So I would say I just always want people to know, if nothing else, that they have been heard and they've been addressed. And that if we can't fix it, the why behind it, or the reason for the decision that has been made. You can't always make the popular decision, but you can explain why.
Thank you. I enjoy talking too.
Dr. Luna-Vedder, excuse me. What have you done to help the public understand the needs and success of your school system?
So I think whether it was while I was serving in district or quite honestly even at the state level, I think it is our responsibility to be the cheerleaders. I think we need to sell our story. I think we need to be telling everyone what is going on. Too often when we let the conversation shift to what's going on in the negative, you lose 95% of the positive. So what are those bright spots? What are the kids doing? I mean, you all know when you walk into a building, 95% of what's going on is great. Unfortunately, sometimes it's that 5% that gets hurt. So what I would say, some examples is really highlighting the great work. Obviously, in this district, the early technical college at TCAT has been amazing. I think that needs to continue to be advertised. The Grow Your Own that has been going on in this district that is honestly receiving national news as we speak. I think every school recognizing what are the positives and highlighting those positives, whether it's the teachers, the paraprofessionals, whether it's just kids earning, accolades. I think that's important to continue. I also think that we need to make sure in our social media that we're continuing to sell that story and then monitoring for some voices. So what is bubbling up? And again, how are we addressing that? It's going to happen, but is it something that if we make a phone call and have a conversation that sometimes that can be diminished? I also think this community does an outstanding job of things like the Leadership CMCSS and Leadership Clarksville, and continuing to have those networking and collaborative partnerships that really help that story.
Dr. Vedder, how would you measure your success as director of schools?
I think there's a number of ways. I think the most obvious is going to be academic achievement. And so when we look at, and we really start digging into the data, our students where they need to be. What do our third grade literacy scores look like? What is our ACT score? What are the academic achievement and the academic growth? I think it's really important to dig in. And what are the trends? Are we trending in a positive direction? Are we trending in a negative direction? And how do we compare to like districts? So not, necessarily who's right next to us, but other similar districts with similar demographics. How do we compare? I think it's important when we talk about that data to make sure that everyone understands what that data looks like and that we are supporting our teachers. So if we have struggling teachers, I think it's going to be very important, not only as we've talked about the Grow Your Own and how we are recruiting teachers, just as important, if not more important, is how are we keeping those really good teachers? And how are we supporting those teachers that may be new, they may be struggling? It's not one of those situations where we want to make sure that we have done everything we can to support teachers with professional development, with supports in the classroom. So I would say some of that survey data from teachers, what are they saying? I know currently, and we're coming off of a pandemic, but teachers aren't necessarily in a good place. Recent survey data shows that teachers are struggling, and they are in this county as well. And so I think one of the important things is going to be really working with teachers. I think district morale and pride. This is a county, and this is a community, and this is a school system that everyone should be proud of. So how are we really promoting that? Going to efficiency in operations, whether it's fiscal, it's budget, all of that needs to be in line and in check in order to be a successful director of schools. I would also say a huge focus on relationships. What would the director of schools, what does that relationship look like with the school board, with the administrators, with the central office staff, with the teachers? What are people saying? You might have one or two off remarks, but if everyone's saying the same thing, there's probably some truth to it. So what does that look like? And ultimately, I think as a director of schools, it should be aligned with the success in the community. So we all know that education is one of the biggest driving factors of a community success. It's why people want to move. It's why we have industries who want to come in to a community. One of the first things at the state level is as I work with partners, Ford Motor Company, when they were looking at Blue Oval City there over in Lauderdale, the first thing they said is, what does the school system look like? So I think as a successful director of schools, you need to make sure that everything is in check and that aligns with industry and the economics in the community.
Dr. Luna, Vedder, since you've been in education as a teacher, administrator, how have you observed changes in student behaviors? And how would you plan to address student discipline and reduce disruptions in the classroom, as well as provide a safe environment for both staff and students?
I think that's extremely important. And so when I began as an educator in 1996, the world did look a little differently. There was no social media. There was less of gang activity, at least in my scope of the world. But I would also say kids at heart are still the same. So it's kind of a two-way street for me. I think very important is going to be looking at what is the current student discipline policy? What is the code of conduct? What is that showing us? Has there been any differences in the last few years? Is the data looking any differently? What have we done differently? I would also say making sure that we are consistent among schools at the same level, but yet we also treat each situation in a unique lens. So we need to actually do our due diligence and make sure that we are examining and not just giving a blanket response to every action. I think we also need to make sure that we are addressing the proactive measures. So recognizing the fact that we are coming out of a pandemic, recognizing the fact that sometimes kids have a lot going on at home. And so what are we doing? As part of my work at the state level, I oversee not only the divisions of college, career, and technical education, but I also oversee student and family supports, which incorporates the counseling. It incorporates what used to be called trauma-informed practices. We are now actually switching slightly. As we're coming out of a pandemic, we are now calling it resilient school communities. So how are we teaching our kids life skills, things that they need to be employable? How do you talk to other people? How do you present yourself? And then how do you have that resilience? Recognizing the fact that something has happened to you and acknowledging that and giving time and space for that, but also talking about how do we move beyond that? So how do we help our kids who may have had a horrible experience in their life, like many of our kids have, but they can't get stuck in that time and space and make that their trajectory? How do we teach them to overcome that and give them examples and give them skills and support to move on with that resilience? I also would recognize looking carefully at those counselor to student ratios. As we know, the funding formula was just passed this last week that will shift how we look at budgeting and how we look at what we do for our students. And one of those measures is that counseling to student ratio. I also think working hand in hand and very collaboratively with our local law enforcement, with our judicial system, and making sure that we are having those conversations. I know, and I'm sure you still do, but we used to have those conversations either monthly or quarterly, depending on the need, related to school safety and what is going on. And I think we also just need to be very collaborative in the approach. So from the policies, from the administrators to the teachers to our parents in the community, we need to be having those conversations to make sure that we are keeping our schools safe, because we know kids can't learn unless it's safe.
Dr. Vedder, this board's focus is on student achievement. If selected as a director, what steps would you take to ensure academic excellence in the school system and to recover from the learning loss of COVID-19 epidemic?
Absolutely. So I would say it begins with conversations with senior leadership, with senior instructional team, really identifying and again digging into that data of where are we currently at, because we can't determine, we can decide where we want to go, but we also need to know where we're at. So what does that look like currently when we look at all levels, when we dig into content areas? I think ultimately we need to have an aligned K-12 plan with some common goals. So what does that look like for literacy? What does that look like for college and career readiness? What does that look like for all levels and determining those benchmarks. We need some key performance indicators. So how are we going to measure that success? What does that look like? So we can come back and have conversations if we're trending in the right direction. I think we also need to make sure that we are tracking the individual student data. So we can track by content, we can track by teachers, that's all great. We can do the schools, but also what does every student's trajectory look like? And how are we determining if we are meeting the needs of every student? Because essentially, if we are doing that, the other things take care of themselves. I also think that we need to make sure that we have a robust system for, again, supporting our teachers. So if we have teachers that are struggling, let's say they're coming back as a level 1, and we see their index growth is actually trending downward, what are we doing to support them? That is as much administration's problem as it is that teacher's problem. We need to make sure that we are retaining and supporting teachers. I think we need to look very carefully at the unique learning needs of students. So students who have IEPs, so our special education, whether they are, we've got EL students or characteristics of dyslexia, and what are we doing there to make sure that we're supporting those students? I also would say related to learning loss through the pandemic, are we doing everything we can with those extra ESSER and GEAR dollars, and are they aligned to the summer schools and the tutorings and the small groups and the strategic interventions? I would say we have got a unique space and time right now that we have an influx of federal dollars that we will probably never see again in our lifetimes. And so with those dollars, what have we done? What are others doing? And what's getting results? So we are able to actually spend some money, figure out what those results are, but then for sustainability and moving forward, that's what we should be doing. So I think it's very important to look at that. I think we need to look very heavily, obviously, at literacy, at math, at our college and career readiness. What about our ACT scores? And then beyond that, the industry credentials and the work-based learnings and the apprenticeships. Again, four-year universities is not for everyone, and that's okay. But what is their plan after high school? And making sure it has pathways that connect. So for instance, I might not be ready for a four-year university right now, but maybe I'm ready for community college. And I can go there for 2 years, and I can get an associate's degree that could then lead me to a four-year university. We have to have robust academic advising, again, going back to our counselors, to make sure that when students are leaving 8th grade, they're not just being put in a program of study as a freshman because we have room for them there. So I may have absolutely no interest in welding, but that's where we have room. So now I'm going to be in welding in high school. It needs to be strategic. At that middle school space, we have created as a state new courses that begin next year for 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, that's really talking about career awareness and taking those career readiness assessments to see what am I good at? What am I interested in? What programs of study are offered at my local high school that align with that, that maybe, ooh, I didn't know that this was actually a job. That sounds really good. I think we need to have those robust conversations.
Thank you.
What plan would you implement to recruit and retain a quality, diverse, and talented group of teachers and employees?
I would say we have an amazing start in this district with Grow Your Own. That is something that obviously needs to continue. I would also say though, again, we cannot emphasize enough the retainment part of this conversation. I think it's important to recognize that it's not our job to presume what educators want or need. We all know, obviously, it's great to give them an increase in salary. I don't think anyone would turn that down. But that's not why most people got into this job. Most people did not go into college and think, I want to become a teacher because I'm going to be rich. That's not why they did it. I'm sorry. That's not why they did it. So I think we need to ask, we need to say, what do you need? What are you missing? What is it that motivates and what drives you? What are we not doing that would help improve what your job looks like on a daily basis? I would say that we need to make sure that we are increasing that pipeline when we talk about high school opportunities. So teaching as a profession courses have been in existence, but we need to make sure that we are expanding what that looks like. We need to elevate the career of teaching. So as a state currently, we are adding post-secondary credits for teaching as a profession. You can take a course starting next year called Introduction to Learning, to Education. That's going to be a college course. You may or may not be in the TAP program, and that's okay. But you can earn post-secondary credit, which typically has not been done so far in education, where you can dip your toe in and say, is this for me? And I can earn a college credit to do so. So I think as a district though, we really need to make this district one that people want to continue to come to and work at. That has historically been the case. And I think what we need to do is though really dig in and start talking about what is it that we may or may not be missing related to teacher retention. Also recognizing that our educators are coming out of a pandemic as well. Their needs may look just differently than they did 2 years ago.
In the current high-pressure environment for teachers, how will you relieve some of the pressure so that they can do their job more effectively?
Again, I think it's having those conversations, but where are there opportunities to potentially cut or change tasks that are very time-consuming but really don't have an impact on student learning? Where can we provide opportunities that increases collaboration and support for teachers? How can we recognize and elevate our quality veteran teachers to make sure that they are getting the kudos on a daily basis that they need? I think also we should be streamlining efficiencies. So gradebook, attendance, what are those things that they have to do that are on their plate that may be made a little bit easier through some efficient processes? I think we also need to be providing teachers as many resources as we can. What can we do as a district that actually provide them support when we talk about the curriculum development and we talk about providing them with lessons and resources? I also think though that we need to provide them the flexibility and respect that they need. So we shouldn't expect cookie cutter teachers. Teaching is an art. So when we walk through, we should respect those teachers that may teach a little differently. I mean, I remember back to high school and I had a teacher, I'll never forget it. He was an English and drama teacher. And on the first day of school, he ate a piece of chalk to make a point. And we just sat there and looked at him. I don't think any of us would ever recommend that to a teacher, but I think it's something that made an impact. And so what are our teachers doing that may not be considered the quote norm, but recognizing and appreciating that everyone teaches a little differently and allowing that to happen? I would also say we need really strong mentorship for those beginning teachers. So making sure that it's more than just a once a week check-in, that as we are getting these people in and we talk about that recruitment, I cannot emphasize enough that retainment and support. So I think that's going to be essential. I also think that it comes back to some of our conversation earlier about the school discipline and the safety and what does that look like. If teachers are struggling on a daily basis just to maintain control of their classroom, that is exhausting, and they do not have the time, the capacity, or the energy to teach. So I think that also comes back.
suggested last night that we do away with all lesson plans to help them have more time.
I don't think they would argue.
Our student body is different now than pre-COVID. Students and teachers have different needs. What will you do to create an atmosphere in the schools that will lead to educational excellence and a positive experience while being mindful of and addressing these changing needs for the students and staffs?
So, again, I think it's important to acknowledge that the needs of students and teachers have changed. I think people's mindset has changed. I think when we talk about educators, some of them now have a different concept of what that work-life balance should look like. I also think students, they've been through a lot the last couple of years. And again, what are we doing proactively to address that? Are we doing trainings with our teachers to let them know about restorative practices and having conversations with students related to their emotional well-being as well? Just those daily check-ins, like, how are you doing? Something seems a little off. Do you need to talk? I think all of those are very important. I would say also recognizing some unique opportunities. I know this district has been able to capitalize on the ELC grant that has been given out through the state. So that is allowing for those extra nurses and those extra COVID supports. And so I know there's been another year extension of that. And so how are we aligning those resources that we found to address some of these needs as a result of the pandemic?
Dr. Luna-Vedder, how will you ensure students, staff, volunteers, the community, and the school board members are engaged in the development and implementation of your long-range goals and strategies for the school system?
I would say the development of the development and implementation of those long-range goals needs to incorporate all stakeholders. So we should be talking with everyone involved. So school board members, administrators, teachers, community members, parents, students. Ultimately, once we have those goals, again, everyone needs to know what they are. That needs to be our message. And how are we going to get there? So for instance, if we decide that we need to increase the benchmark readiness on the ACT in the 11th grade, it's too late to wait till the 10th or 11th grade to get students ready for the ACT. What does that look like when we talk about that backwards design? To be benchmark ready as an 11th grader, what does that look like in the 8th grade? What does that look like in the 5th grade? What does that look like in the 3rd grade? Then what are those benchmark trends that we need to know to be hitting? I think we also need to be collaborative and on the same page. So whatever those goals are, we need to be transparent about whether we're hitting them. And that's okay. It might be in the 3rd grade, we did not hit it. That cannot continue to trend downward, because if we're not hitting that in the 3rd grade, what does that mean for the 11th grade? If we continue on that trajectory, so what are we going to shift and do to look differently? I think it's going to be very important that everyone understands how they can contribute to those goals. I think we are going to continue to need to have focus groups and engagement meetings to gather that input, feedback, and communication. And I think ultimately we need to make sure that we are sharing that data publicly. I think data should not be something, we are not always going to be perfect, and that's okay. So if our scores are not stellar in one area, that's okay. But we better know how or what we're going to do as next steps, and make that very public and tell people how they can help us contribute. This is not just a problem that belongs in one school or one teacher or one administrator.
Dr. Luna, CMCSS has always been a leader in education and innovation in the state of Tennessee. What is your vision to continue that leadership role?
So I would recognize that I think some of what has gone on needs to continue. The early technical college at the TCAT. I would say That initiative right there alone in Clarksville-Montgomery County, I don't know if you all know this or not, but that ended up being a statewide initiative. So what happened there at the TCAD here in Montgomery County was we started that program, and it has continued, I know, to grow this past year. The Commissioner of Education, after some long conversations, decided that we would invest $30 million across the state for 21 districts to receive what was called an innovative high school model. Clarksville-Montgomery was awarded one of those grants. Well, on visits to visit some of these 21 districts across the state, Governor Lee said, "This is fantastic. I love how we're rethinking high school and thinking about it a little differently. How can we make this happen across the state?" It was kind of wild, but I was like, I think $500 million. $500 million. There's about 330 high schools. If every high school had about $1 million, but I really think it's going to be important to give $500,000 to every middle school, because the work really needs to start in middle school. High school's too late. By the time they're in high school, they really need to know, as they're entering freshman year, some of what's available. So again, that $500 million was signed into the governor's budget just last week. So here in Montgomery County, we need to be thinking strategically. What does that look like for every one of the high schools here to get $1 million? What is going to be done with that money? What is going to be done with the middle school that feeds it? It may be aligned to the existing academies. It may not. Also currently adopted last week was the funding formula that is essentially going to look very differently at how schools and districts are being funded. CTE is one of those. And so what does it look like to have a high quality CTE program, and what are our high schools doing, or what could they be doing to really capitalize on some of those jobs that are coming up in the future? I think we also need to really be looking at employability skills. A lot of our industry partners are saying it's not even just the technical skills or the academics. They're like, we can teach them that. We can't teach them how to show up to work on time. We can't teach them about what it looks like to actually be invested and be able to communicate and have good conversations. So I think it's going to be important to make sure we're doing that. I would also say that we need to stay abreast of what's going on nationally. What are those strategic initiatives or those things that really make sense? But I would also emphasize, as long as it's aligned to our goals and where we're going and what we need to do. We don't want to just be doing things in silos to do them, but are they going to lead to what we want as far as our academic and our overall strategic goals?
Dr. Luna-Vedder, CMCSS board operates under policy governance. What is your experience with policy governance, and how comfortable are you operating in policy governance system?
So I would say this is the district that I am the most familiar with, as I've been here for 12 years. Policy governance is, to me, what that means is it really aligns perfectly with my philosophy. So I think about policy governance as something where we all bring our uniqueness and our strengths and our weaknesses and we come together and we work collaboratively, knowing that we can work better together than alone, and also knowing we can have different opinions, but once a decision is made, that is all of our decisions. So it's very similar to working, quite honestly, with the Commissioner of Education currently as one of her 8 members on the cabinet. And we can have robust conversations, and we do on a daily basis. At the end of every day, at 4:30 every day, we get together for a cabinet meeting. And we can all come with different opinions about how to solve something, but we also know, once we walk out and we make a decision, we all own that decision. So it doesn't matter whose idea it was. It doesn't matter if we disagreed with it when we walked in. Once we agree to a decision, that is that collaborative, that team decision, and we own it. I think it's very important to act in unison and to act as a team. Again, I am very much of the mindset that no one individual should be getting the accolades, no one individual should be making decisions, that it should be very much a collaborative, unified approach. And I also love policy governance, that it really focuses on what matters. It focuses on what matters in school related to academic achievement, and it has a specific focus that that really sets the stage. And I would say the other point of that is the importance of always being professional. We can agree, we can disagree, that's okay, but never losing that professionalism. That's of utmost importance.
Thank you.
Dr. Vedder, tell us the most important decision that you've made in your last or current position, and how did you involve the people who would be affected by that decision?
So as I was looking at this question, I was really thinking about what are decisions that ultimately are going to impact many people and have a lasting effect. And right now we are in the throes of the TISA funding formula. So as you know, the BEP, which is how schools have been funded, has been in existence for 30 years. In legislation, just on Monday, the governor signed it into law that the TISA funding formula will go into effect in the fall of 23. So as part of that, the division that I oversee is college and career technical education. Part of the law references CTE. As such, our team is responsible for writing the rule for that law. We are responsible for writing the policies and the implementation in something called a TISA guidebook, and also the resources. So this week, we have been on what the commissioner affectionately calls a retreat, which means we are working from 7 a.m. till about 6 p.m. every day in TISA land. And our team is looking specifically at career technical education. As part of the funding formula, CTE is part of the direct allocations. What it says in law is that CTE will be looked at differently. We will be tiering programs of study. So there will be 3 tiers. And ultimately, we will be looking at how careers are in demand, high wage, high skill, and the resources it takes to run a program of study. We will be tiering those, and they will be paid differently. So as we look at our current programs, it may be, I will use floral design because we no longer have floral design. It may be that floral design was a level 1. It is not going to be paid as much to school districts as, let's say, an aviation program that costs more money and has more wage earning potential. So those decisions currently are being made, and we are involving numerous stakeholders. Essentially, right now, we are writing the rule. I have a team that will incorporate superintendents across the state and incorporate CTE directors, Department of Labor, ECD, Department of Ag. I have about 18 people on the team. We are going to convene Tuesday, and essentially what we create this week, we are going to pressure test with them next Tuesday and say, how does this feel? Let's try this on. What do we need to get? What do we need to get right? We know the BEP was here for 30 years. If this funding formula is here for 30 years, we need to make sure we are getting this right. And so that's probably some of the biggest decisions that our team is in the middle of making right now.
Thank you.
How would you make certain the public knows and supports what's happening in our schools?
I think we need to be comfortable with being the voice, and it's really hard sometimes to shine a light on yourself. It's really hard as a high school principal in a past role to say, hey, look at us over here and see what we're doing. But I think that's important. I think it's going to be important to recognize that. I also think it's going to be important to strategically plan with the communications team here at the central office to make sure that we have a well thought out plan for what does that look like for each month? What does it look like for this week as far as how we are communicating with others? I also think, again, it's going to be very important to have those relationships with the community, to build networks and partnerships. Oftentimes, when you start going outside of your own agency and having those conversations, people don't even know what's occurring until you share with them. I would also encourage administrators, teachers, parents to share positive stories. How can we create a venue or an opportunity for them to continue to submit what is going on that really makes us feel good? And what are those stories that as you read them and see them, it really elevates the career of teaching? I think we also need to find creative ways to share successes in addition to the annual reports, the monthly newsletters, the engagement groups. How can we think a little bit more outside the box to make sure that we are selling that story? And I would also say it's going to be very important as we think about that culture and about what that looks like to get down again to that teacher level. That's going to be essential.
And Dr. Luna, have you been successful in getting strong parental and community support for a school, program, or district? Tell us about one such success.
Absolutely. So I think the one that immediately comes to mind when I think about the strong parental support goes back again to that early technical college at TCAT. So essentially when we were first starting that, we were having those parent meetings. Parents and kids got very excited. So it was a door that opened for many of those families. As we held those parent nights, whether they chose to enroll their student or their student chose to come or not, I think the fact that we were rethinking what high school could look like was really eye-opening for a lot of those parents and for some community members. It doesn't mean that we need to go for 7 hours a day to high school and do the same thing. So I think that is the one that immediately comes to mind.
Thank you.
Explain how you would develop a school system budget and tell us who you would involve and how you would involve them.
So I think when you're talking about a school system budget, I think you essentially need to break down what that looks like. What are all the components and who are the people that need to be at the table for each section? So obviously you have all of the instructional components. So the senior leadership team, the director of schools, the school board members, the instructional teams that really weigh in on each part and component. I think it needs to be made in tandem and aligned to whatever your strategic goals are. So as we're looking, and let's say we're focused on literacy, how does that align to what we're spending? I think it's going to be essential to really start looking as we think about this new funding formula and we think about outcomes. There's going to be an opportunity for outcomes to be generated that actually generates additional dollars for districts. So are we investing money to make money? So what are those unique opportunities? I think we need to make sure that when we are including those leaders, they are having conversations with everyone that it impacts. So for instance, if we're talking about the athletic budget, have we talked to the person who oversees that at the district level? Have we talked to the athletic directors at the high schools? Have we talked to community members about what sports are important to them or if there's programs being added? Is that something that we're sure is a community demand? I also think that we need to make sure as we're looking at that, that we are thinking very carefully beyond 1 year. So essentially, I understand that budgets are made annually, but what does that sustainability look like, especially right now? As I work with districts on some of their budgeting plans and we have conversations, there's an influx of money right now. How is that being spent and what does that look like 3 years from now? So are we creating positions or are we creating things that are that make sense? We know they're only going to be in existence for 3 years. They are directly supporting learning loss, but we know we're going to phase those out. Or is it something that we think we need to incorporate into what the annual budget looks like? I think what we don't want to do is 3 years from now, as the ESSER and federal money is going away, that there is some sort of cliff where all of a sudden we have no plan for sustainability. So I think that is going to be essential. I also think we need to think about return on investment. So is there something that we're spending a considerable chunk of money on, and we have been for several years? Is it creating the outcomes that we thought it would? What does that data look like? Are we investing into something and getting the returns? If we are, great, then we should sustain that. If not, how can we think about what that looks like differently?
Dr. Luna-Vedder, our board is dependent upon the county commission to fund the budget. How would you propose to gain their support of the budget?
I think when you talk about any type of interaction here, it comes down to relationships. So I think it begins with having not just group conversations, but individual conversations. What does that look like? While I have not directly worked with county commissioners before, I would compare it somewhat to my work that I've done with legislators at the state. So when we have a bill that is going forth, that is being sponsored by education or by the governor, we have one-on-one conversations with legislators. We know how they're feeling. If they're supportive, wonderful. If they're not, tell us why. Is there something we can change and adjust that makes sense? What is giving you heartburn about this bill? Do we do an amendment? Or is it we can agree to disagree, but ultimately this is what where we need to go? I think those one-on-one conversations are essential in order to have a whole group conversation that is meaningful. I also believe in transparency. So I think whatever you say you're going to do, you do, and I think you earn the trust of people. And making sure that you don't say you can do something that is impossible to do. I think it's going to be essential to listen. A lot of what this looks like is listening if there is an issue about why there is a perceived issue. Again, the importance of that collaborative and team approach. And then I think also demonstrating how the investment in K-12 education impacts the larger picture of Clarksville. It impacts the local workforce. It impacts industry and economic and community, and essentially even criminal activity. So thinking through what those impacts and connections are, I think we also need to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to make sure that the money is aligned to strategic goals and outcomes, and showing that and saying, this is where the money went. These are the results. This was the impact. We doubled work-based learning. We had a 75% increase in industry credentials. X plus Y equals Z, and what that means for all of you and what that means for the community. I also think that it's important to always stay grounded and humble. So essentially knowing that organizations and entities need to work with one another, and no one organization is any more important than the other.
Dr. Luna, high-performing students and accountability are priorities for our schools. How will you assess the district's current levels of performance, program, effectiveness and teacher effectiveness.
This is my favorite part. So this is where we really start digging into that data. I think of it kind of like an upside down triangle, so that funnel effect. So where are we as a district? Where are we at levels, at high school, at middle school, at elementary school? Where are we at every individual school? What does that look like by content area or grade level? What does that look like by teacher? And I think really digging into what that looks like, again, not for finger pointing. I think it is so essential that everyone understands, as sometimes people get scared when you dig into data and they're afraid of what that says about them. Should not, I think the shift in mindset has to be a growth mindset. We cannot fix the problem, we cannot elevate what this looks like without really knowing how it looks. I think it's going to be in education as well. So for instance, when you look at TVAS scores, there's a level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. When you really dig into it, the levels are actually determined by something called an index score. So if you are a -2 or below, that's a level 1, -2 to -1 is a level 2, a -1 to a +1 is a level 3. So again, that level 3 is actually double the size of what a level 4 or a level 5 is. So I think making sure that everyone intimately understands down to the teacher level. I remember having conversations with teachers who would be so frustrated. And they're like, I am a level 3 again. Like, okay, but let's look. They're like, 3rd year, level 3. Well, let's look. 2 years ago, you were a -9.7. You were barely not a 2. Last year, you were 0.1, okay, 1/10. You made a huge jump. You are now sitting at 0.78. You are almost a 4. Like, do you see the trends? And if you continue that and what that looks like, that is progress. So I think it's having those conversations. I think it is also being vulnerable and being able to share success. What did you do differently? How did you teach this in order to get these scores? I think that's going to be essential. I also think that we cannot forget this fall on the annual report card for the first time, we will have letter grades assessed to every single school in every district. So all of our schools are going to have a letter attached to them. How are we having conversations before that happens to prepare everybody, to prepare the community, to prepare the teachers, to prepare the schools for whatever those results may look like, that they've got the mindset, whatever that may be, here's the plan to move forward from that. And making it a positive conversation. We don't know what those scores will look like. We don't know what those letter grades will look like. But I think that's something you don't want to hit and then worry about how to respond to it.
Dr. Luna-Vedder, give some specific examples of actions you've taken as a teacher, administrator, that you think contributed to making your faculty and staff an effective team. And how did you build support for that change, even in the face of opposition?
So I would say going back again to my years at Clarksville High School. So I was at Clarksville High School for 7 years. When I came to Clarksville High School, there had been a lot of transition. I was there for 1.5 years as an assistant principal before I was asked, when Dr. Casebolt came to the district office to become the principal of that school. And there had been just a lot of turnover, to be quite frank. And so there was lots going on. And so when we first started, we had not the best scores in the county, and that was disheartening. And I particularly remember a group of teachers, English 2 teachers, who they wanted to be the best, and their scores came back as level 1. All of them were level 1, and the the content area was a level 1. And they were so disheartened, but they had the right mindset. So they came in one day in the summer, on their day off, it was July. Let's sit down, I'm all about a good whiteboard, so let's get out the whiteboard, let's come up with a plan. So they started talking, we came up with a plan that essentially involved, what does it look like if we change our master schedule? Again, July, my counselors had a little bit of a panic. What does it look like if we change the master schedule so all of you will have the same planning period? So at least one day a week, you can work together, collaborate. Let's work on what this looks like. How can we get the district ELA coordinator to come in on that one day a week to give you support? What resources can we give you? Can we give you some professional development? Can we give you a day of planning? We're gonna put substitutes in your room one day each quarter where you just sit and work on what you need to work on to give you that support. And so ultimately those teachers ended up that next year coming to a level 3 and the following year a level 5, and they remained level 5. And then ultimately their success actually helped build some success of other teams and other teachers, and actually ended up being something that was a snowball effect in that school as we first then went from English to biology, and then we went to every tested area. That really, again, it's about, I think, empowering teachers and trusting teachers and letting them know that they are not failures. Like, this is an opportunity that we just need to look at differently, and how can we do this as a team? And what do you need to make us do that? And so that is probably the example that comes to mind.
Dr. Vedder, explain what you've done to be able to maintain a good relationship with your board or administrator staff.
Absolutely. So while I was a high school director, I was able to have some interactions. I remember coming in front of some of you in this group several times to do presentations and ask for things and tell you really about all the work that was going on, particularly at that point at the high schools, and sharing the successes and sharing where we had some opportunities for growth and having conversations about ideas. I think we ultimately spent a lot of time also at graduation ceremonies and having some of those informal conversations that I think become very meaningful. I think it's opportunities such as those. It's not in the formal setting at board meetings that the real work happens. It's at those informal sessions. It's at the conversations of even as things are coming up. And essentially, there were many times where one of you may have reached out and said, I'm hearing this, tell me about this, or this parent mentioned this. Those are opportunities for growth. And so if you're hearing it, what is going on? So I think we had many conversations such as that. I would also say that we have had some really good conversations about the potential, and it's much of the work that has actually occurred in this district the last several years. It's those innovations. And so this board promoting and expanding when we talked about the Grow Your Own and what that could look like, and not just for our classified employees, but what about if we involved high school students, and how could that look? So for me, it's very much an importance of building strong relationships as individuals. And I've always believed that when times get really tough, if you've got those strong relationships, that is where we end up being able to come to those positive solutions.
How would you work with your board to be effective, make good decisions, and be respected as a board by the community?
I think that would begin with me, making sure that I'm doing everything in the community, publicly, personally, professionally, to make sure that I'm being a good representative and a steward for this district. I also think it is that communication. I've had some great mentors in this district, and obviously had some really good examples. And what I have been taught is that you can never put enough emphasis on culture, communication, order, and input. You really need to focus on those. And I think a lot of that comes as part of this. What does that culture look like? How are we leading by example? I think when I think about across this state, and I think about this district and school board, it has never been one of those school boards that is making the news for being divisive. And so that is extremely important when you've got that public perception and you've got that unified front. So I think publicly we need to continue to have that common voice.
Thank you, Dr. Luna. Thank you for applying for the position of Director of Schools for Clarksville-Montgomery County School System. And thank you for answering our questions. We will take a short recess at 6:15. They will start the employee input portion of the question for Dr. Luna. We stand in recess.